Welcome to the Enlightenment Podcast, your guide to inner growth, self-discovery, and living a life of intention. Hosted by Mischel and Casados, we explore mindfulness, mental clarity, and the science of self-awareness to help you thrive. Join us as we uncover the power of enlightenment, because true insight begins within. And every step forward starts with looking inward.
Welcome back to the Enlightenment Podcast. I'm Paul Mischel, and I'm joined with my host, Carlos Casados. How are you, Carlos?
Doing great. It's a beautiful day here in California.
Yeah, lovely. We've actually got a pretty good day here in Melbourne. It's one of the rare sunny days for winter. So usually it's cold and dreary, but we're actually looking more like spring than we are like winter. So tell me a little bit about what's been going on for you. I love hearing some of your little journeys and stories and stuff like that. So what have you been up to?
Oh, well, I just got back from one of the largest, if not the largest, hypnosis conference in the world. It's called Hypno Thoughts Live, and it happens in Vegas every year, Las Vegas, Nevada. And I got to speak on topics near and dear to my heart, such as the psychedelic integration process, how you help people who are doing change work and deep development utilizing sacred medicines, and how the epiphanies and all the wonderful experiences that they have can be taken into their lives in a very real way. So it's where the rubber meets the road kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's really awesome.
Yeah, one of the biggest events on the hypnotherapy, psychotherapy calendar over there in the US. I've definitely got plans to go across to the US at one point in time and have a bit of a look-see, and you never know, maybe they'll invite me to present. I don't know what they do with my accent though. It'd probably be hard to understand.
No, none at all. In fact, I think you'd be extremely popular there. I think people would love your presentation style and they would understand you fine. We got people from the UK and people from Australia, New Zealand, and stuff. So I think you'd be very welcome. And there's tons of things you could present that would bring tremendous value there. I love going because I get to see my colleagues and I get to meet new people and I get to share about stuff that's important to me. And I just think it's a wonderful experience, and we have a lot of fun doing it. It's not a situation where the teachers are aloof. It's more of like people are playing and having fun and having together, and sometimes getting dressed up. We have these fun parties and stuff after, and there's just a warmth, and the culture is designed to be more approachable and is wonderful experience for people, especially newbies. Like I meet a lot of newbies that come, they're like, oh, it's the first time coming and this is so amazing. I can't wait to come next year, because they do have such a great experience.
Yeah. Sounds like fun. We don't have anything quite like that in Australia, but maybe one day I'll get across. And it's in Vegas, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Currently it's at the Sahara, although years and years ago, and for many years it was at, spacing out on the name. Anyway, it'll come to me later, but it's where it's at the Sahara now.
I've been to the Sahara.
There's fun things to do in Vegas. Yeah.
There are, and hopefully what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And I heard recently a bit of a play on that. What happens in vagueness stays in vagueness.
That's clever. I like it.
Which is a good one for hypnosis and hypnotherapy and stuff like that. But I had to go out to the US when I was in the sports nutrition game. I was invited to go to the Mr. Olympia competition not as a participant, definitely not as a competitor, but at that point in time, I was the Australian product development manager for GNC Live Well in Australia. And one of our clients was a very prominent US brand, and they invited me over. And it was actually at the Sahara. So it's a great venue. It's a great venue. Just a
Oh,
little bit off the strip, isn't it? It's back off
it
the
is.
strip.
It is. It's much nicer than the previous hotel, which for some reason I forgot the name of. But um, it's a hotel that's probably going to be taken down in the next year or so. So it's a good thing that we're not there while it's getting taken down, right?
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it would be very hard, awkward, and dangerous. You know who showed up this year and last year? Chuck Palahniuk. Do you know who that is?
have no idea who's Chuck
Author
Palahniuk.
of American Psycho and many other
Oh,
books.
right.
That's
Okay.
what he's most famous for. But he comes. I have a suspicion he's doing background for a future book of some kind.
It
Um,
sounds like it. It sounds like
yeah,
it.
yeah. But he kind of keeps to himself, but he's very recognizable. He shows up there, um,
Mm.
And this year we were graced by our buddy James Tripp. He
Yeah,
came
fantastic.
and shared his wealth of knowledge and wisdom, and that was great to hang out with him. And it's just always good to see the friends, and the time in the classes are great, but
Mm.
I think even more great are the side conversations, the meals that you have with people, and things like that, when you just can dive into whatever you want to talk about. And
Mm.
a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, today's podcast, the topic of today's podcast that you and I have had a bit of a chat about is the authenticity side of things, the nature of vulnerability, and also how that ties into things like leadership. So authenticity, vulnerability, leadership, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts on like what when you think of authenticity, what comes up for you?
Great. Yeah, I have lots to say about this. It's a topic that is really important. Um, People think of authenticity as being genuine, being real, kind of letting go of the facade and allowing a sense of deep um, truth coming out. But there's another element that people don't often recognize, and I think it's important to say, and it's this element of being self-authoring, right? So to be authentic is to be all those things that I mentioned, but also to embody a self-authoring style or quality, a direction to what you're doing. So I think that when you are, um, getting down to what you truly feel and who you truly feel you are, and you start to experience living from that place, self-authoring is the result. You start to realize that there's something inside of you that's genuine and authentic that is coming out, and it starts to steer your experience in different ways. Your reality starts to be different. Start to see, hear, feel things differently, and you experience them differently. So I feel like that's important. There's plenty of falseness in the world. There's plenty of, even I would say, fake sincerity, where people they feign all of the qualities that might come along with what they think of being sincere and genuine. Like they
Mm.
might have an affect or a certain way they speak or whatever. But people who are perhaps manipulative or uh, dishonest might use those things, but when you make it a habit to dive into your truest feelings, to get clear on your emotionally intelligent understanding of who you are and what you feel, authenticity is often the result of that.
Mm.
And
Mm.
you make when you're less involved with just trying to make other people happy or satisfy other people's expectations, or um, if you're driven by a fear of showing your true self because you don't want people to think things of you that you don't want them to think. Uh, it's a prison. It's kind of, it prevents a person from being real. And realness requires sometimes slowing down. It requires being still enough that you can get a good felt sense of what you are and who you are, and knowing yourself. Like, even, I think my Tai Chi teacher was saying that primary purpose of Tai Chi is to know yourself. What did he mean by that? I think he meant a lot of things. He meant know your balance, know your ego, know your intent, know yourself in context. Where are you in relation to what? All these things are related, and so it's an ongoing practice. I don't think you just reach this point where, okay, well, I'm authentic now. That's it. It's an effort that you make throughout your life to reveal maybe areas where you've been inauthentic and you need to look at it, or areas where you could just be more authentic. You could dive deeper into what you truly feel, and learning how to be comfortable with that is a challenge for some people. If you're a sensitive individual, you might feel nervous about being honest about how you really feel. You might be worried that people won't like you, or that they'll be mad at you, or that you've transgressed somehow. People who are very sensitive about other people's boundaries might be playing it nice, and they're not really giving people the benefit of their truth. And I think the thing that gets missed sometimes is that if you share your truth and maybe it's uncomfortable for someone else, that can sometimes be very welcome. Like, not everybody goes through life not wanting to be challenged. Not everybody goes through life wanting to have the world reflect exactly what they think it is. Many people go through life wanting a change. They want something different. They want to see who you really are, and they want to know if they're misstepping or if they're doing something that you're not liking. Many people want to be taken out of their box and into a larger box or a different box. So there's so many benefits to embracing the fear that can come up for people when it comes to being authentic, that it just becomes a great philosophical yoga, a way of like uniting yourself in relation to how you deal with everyone and everything. So it's a path. Being authentic is a path. Yeah, that's what I have to say for now. That's my to it.
I love watching you get all passionate about it. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so much inside of what you shared. The first thing that struck me was the self-authoring thing was just something I hadn't actually considered before. I was like, oh, I really like that. It's also a little bit of an ambiguity. Like you could almost like, authoring, like authenticity, like like, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's just in that moment, I was like, oh yeah, that sort of, that ongoing process of evolution and that self-authoring, but authoring according to what, like what sort of values, what kind of beliefs do you hold about the world? And then as you were talking, I was thinking, oh, like you're touching on reputation, you're touching on character. And for me, I spend a lot of time in the corporate space, and I often talk about authenticity, from an emotional intelligence standpoint in one of the frameworks that we use in the GENOS model, which is an Australian emotional intelligence framework that was developed with Swinburne University. There's a competency there around authenticity, and authenticity is that this piece around expressing yourself in the right way at the right time, to the right degree, with the right people. And if you do that and you're expressing yourself authentically and you're connected to your emotional experience, you can articulate that well, then people will go, all right, well, there's a person that I trust. You come across as genuine. Yeah. And if not, you might come across as untrustworthy. So there's this element here around trust, like, is what you're saying and what you're doing, are they aligned? Mm. And is what you say and what you mean, is there a gap? Mm-hmm. And is there a gap between what you do and what you mean? And when people are trying to get that felt sense of, are you being real? It's this, is there a gap between what you say and what you mean? Is there a gap between what you mean and what you do? And is there a gap between what you say and what you do? And when they point to the gap, that's when you come across as being inauthentic or non-genuine. Mm-hmm. So there's this piece here, particularly when it feeds back into things like leadership, where I highlight that, a lot of people are focused on their reputation. And for some people, they have excellent reputations, and then people meet them and they don't live up to that reputation.
Right.
And some people have undeserved reputations from the perspective that perhaps they've been maligned, and they're, really great leaders, great people, just great humans. But for whatever reason, they've been maligned by people who have, some type of frame around it. And then you meet them and you go, hang on a second, this person's actually a really good person. Like they're a good, authentic human. What's going on with the reputation versus their character? So I tend to focus on character and hope that my reputation aligns with my character. I know that a lot of people have a tendency to focus on their reputation and they're not too worried about the character side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that when you get that alignment between reputation and character, that's when I think we really see that really lovely authenticity, who you are and what I've heard about you are aligned. And in that moment, I go, oh, that's a really congruent human. What they're known for and who they are, there is no gap. So yeah, it was really interesting as you were talking about that authoring process. I think some people are very busy authoring and trying to build their reputation and not really thinking about their character. And so when you were talking about the whole insincerity thing, one of the things that comes up for me is social media influencers.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And one of my pet peeves is when they're filming themselves crying and they're like, every now and then they make a sneaky little look to the camera. And you go, you're just doing this for likes. You're just doing this for the subscribes. You're just doing this because you want to be seen, and you're faking that sincerity. But at one point in time, you set that camera up, and then you started crying on cue. And I go, outside of the frame of what you're presenting, I'm not really picking up what you're putting down. So it's one of my pet peeves, to be honest.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot.
Yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned that. But you also reminded me of a very famous story of a very authentic human being named the Buddha. Well, technically he was Siddhartha Gautama, but they called him the Buddha, which means enlightened, right? Enlightened one. And he had already established himself as a teacher, and there was I think it was a prince or a magistrate of some kind. The details escape me, but there was a big, huge festival, and the Buddha had kind of like a seat of honor next to this. We'll just say it was a prince, okay, who was a student of the Buddha and was seeking to learn the Dhamma, the Dharma of the Buddha, right, the teachings. And during this festival, somewhere in the middle, there was a disheveled, apparently pregnant woman who stormed into the middle of the field where all of the, demonstrations and martial arts and battles and dances and everything was happening, right? She wandered in them and she started leveling all these accusations and screaming, and her hair was all over the place, and her clothing was kind of messy, and she was kind of wobbling in, essentially accusing the Buddha of misconduct, particularly sexual misconduct. And it was a very tense moment. And the prince was kind of looking at the Buddha for guidance as to how to handle this, because normally this would be handled pretty severely. And these accusations that were being leveled against the Buddha were pretty intense, things that would not align congruently, authentically with him being this enlightened person. At this point, the Buddha had he talks about the process of his decision, like what to do about this when there's really no way to prove otherwise, and you're being accused and you've got this situation that's being leveled against you. What do you do? And he realized that, well, in his clarity, he could ask the prince to have her removed, or he could say, no, that of course that's not true what she's saying. And the prince would believe the Buddha, and the result would be that woman would be harmed. She would probably be executed for creating a ruckus and lying and all that kind of stuff. And if he said nothing, he was kind of like between a rock and a hard place, because if he did nothing about it, then of course it destroys people's impression of what the practice of the Dhamma or the Dharma is, because now he's this person who would do these terrible things. And he's a hypocrite because he's not following the the tenets of Buddhism, of his practice. So he instead became very still. He centered himself and he waited. And it was a very tense period of time because people were getting impatient. They were getting really kind of nuts about this situation. Meanwhile, off to the side were the Brahmins. Okay. There was a box filled with the Brahmin priests. And they were watching and indignant, and they were yelling that something needs to be done about this Buddha character and everything. And while they were saying that, and while the time was passing, and while the movements of this lady were kind of erratic, I guess one of the ties to one of the things that were stuffing her belly came loose. And it started to slip out from the layers of clothing that she was having on. And it became clear that this pregnancy was not a pregnancy. It was just a fake belly, basically, that a prosthetic kind of added part of her costume. And she tried to stuff it back in, but people were pointing at her from the crowd and laughing and yelling. And so at that point, the Buddha knew it was time for him to say something, because if she were just committing this fraud, she would be executed, because she created this huge distraction and, a disruption. And of course, it was leveling it against an honored guest in front of this nobility, right? So that at that point, the prince said, hey, how should I handle this? I don't know how to handle this. And that's when the Buddha advised compassion and forgiveness, and basically had her removed. But he said, please don't harm, let no harm come to her in my name, please. And so he honored that request, and he made sure that no harm came to her, but she was asked to leave. And of course, he looked at all of the Brahmins in the box, and he saw that how involved they were. And he asked the woman, he said, hey, before you leave, why did you do this? And you need to tell me the truth, because I'm demanding that as your prince. And so she told the truth, that she had no choice, that the Brahmins were getting her to do that because they were jealous of the Buddha's following, and that people were not following the Brahmins as much anymore. And so that they put her up to it. They made her get close to him. And she said, try as she might, she could never get right up next to the Buddha. She wanted to, she didn't want to, but she was asked to seduce him, and he was unable to be seduced because the inner circle would not let her close enough. Mm. So this was like the backup plan, was to just sort of act as though it did happen. And when the prince found out about all of this, he ended up basically banishing the Brahmins for a while. So at the end of the day, no one was truly harmed from it. And the Buddha was able to maintain his reputation and also behave in a compassionate way that showed his true mastery, that even in light of incredible accusations, and even though he didn't have someone defending him, that really the wrongdoers' lack of centeredness caused them to make mistakes that will eventually show themselves in time. Maybe not immediately, but in time, their inauthenticity will reveal itself. And so that's kind of like the ask, or the prompt I get from that, which is, in light of that kind of darkness, focus in on your center, focus in on your light, and stay there. And you have to live that way. You have to live with that kind of trust and live with that vulnerability, which is kind of a good segue for us, because I know that we were going to talk about vulnerability and the importance of it. But I'll break right there, because I want to hear from you about that.
Yeah, I love that story. I haven't heard that one before, and you told that so beautifully. I was completely engrossed in the story, going, "Ooh, this is interesting." And what came up for me was, you shall know them by their fruits. And not that I'm a religious individual or anything like that, but it was interesting. It's sort of like in that moment, it's like the the best way of demonstrating one's character is through behavior. And, it seems like the Buddha was in a bit of a bind, to respond in either direction would have either validated one perspective or another. And it also tied back into our previous podcast with regards to conflict. And there was some pieces in there that I thought were nice as well in regards to separating the person from the problem and, seek to do no harm to the relationship at the very minimum as part of your conflict resolution strategy. So that do no harm piece really resonated with me quite deeply. The interesting thing is, being authentic also means that at times we will feel really vulnerable and not know how we're being received. And you mentioned earlier on speaking your truth, and it's interesting because I watch some people and they start telling people their truth, and what's interesting is they may be speaking their truth, but they're doing that in a way that's not emotionally intelligent and not respectful of other people's truth as well. It's like, I'm speaking my truth and it's the truth, as opposed to I'm speaking my truth and it's just my perspective on things. And I go, well, you can speak a truth just as long as you're not an asshole when you do it. I've got this universal principle that I think threads its way through, most religions and dare I say, probably most spiritual practices. And it's don't be a dick. And and I think if you're speaking your truth and you're coming across as a bit of a dick, you're probably doing something wrong there. And you're also demonstrating your character as well.
Definitely.
But the piece there around speaking your truth is really interesting because I've done some trainings with allied health professionals in which part of what we do is have them get clear about their purpose, like why are they here on planet Earth, and like what's their vision, mission, their big picture, and it might not necessarily be for their whole life. It might be just for now, but these are people who have stepped into the position of being in the service of others and people, people who help people. I mean, like that's what they're there to do. They've set their businesses up. And what's really interesting is when you start getting them clear about their values and their beliefs, one of the next things is for them to step forward and say that out loud. And we've had them try and do that in an environment where they're surrounded by people of like mind, like character. They're all in the same industry doing the same thing. And when they try and speak their truth, they struggle. Their voice shuts down
and shakes and rattles and all that.
It shakes. They just start to choke, and it's really fascinating how often that happens. Is they've invested time, energy, effort, money. They've gone out and they've educated themselves. They've got credentials. They're trying to market themselves, and now you're going, okay, great, step up and speak your truth and speak your truth loudly. The goal of doing business, as Simon Sinek says, is not to, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. He talks about starting with why, that belief, those values, those core values, and then that translates to your how, and then it translates to your what. And you get these people and they call themselves whatever title, that could be, hypnotherapist, it could be acupuncturist, it could be physio, and they step up and they then try and utter their truth and they choke because in that moment they're feeling very vulnerable. And my perspective is, if you won't speak your truth, then who will?
Mm-hmm.
And it's perfectly okay to speak your truth, obviously, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of somebody else's perspective on subjective reality, and that we can find a way to hold both perspectives without necessarily negating somebody else's perspective. It's just like, it's just your truth, it's my truth, and like we've got maybe different perspectives on the truth. But it's really interesting to see how vulnerable people become when they're trying to articulate that, and you start to watch some of the armor come off them, some of the ego, some of the status stuff, and they're just revealing their true self. And it gets really fascinating. It's really interesting. I see that as a bit of a hypnotic phenomena, that when they start to choke up, you're getting this other than conscious response. But to me, it's an indication that in some way, shape or form, they're not congruent. They're not aligned. In that moment, there's something there around the authenticity piece that they're doing all this stuff, and yet there's another part of them that perhaps doesn't quite buy into it or hasn't quite aligned with it. And that's when we start to get this stuff coming up. So really, really interesting, really interesting.
Well,
So, you know,
yeah, I
behavior
was
is the
going
highest form of communication.
what you were saying about that reminded me of that little piece of this woman who had the armor, but in her case, the armor was this sort of fake,
Billy.
the belly that she had, right? And it came loose. And when that happened, you can almost empathize with how exposed she must have felt. And especially to the point where um, when the prince was asking her, who put you up to this? Why did you do this? Why would you level this against this great man? Why would you do it at all? And then her desire to be honest in that moment was an authentic moment. It was a vulnerable moment. It might have been forced by the situation and by the circumstances. And that's the thing, is we can sometimes be forced into authenticity, and it can often be the best thing for us. But it is, I think, more desirable to choose to go into that so that it's more on your terms. It's more integrated with your volition, right? Like, I'm wanting this and I'm choosing this. And think about what happens when you make that choice consistently. Parts of you adjust and become acclimated to that idea, and it becomes easier. I think it is easier for people to be authentic if they practice being authentic, rather than having to get exposed for the fraudulent behaviors that they may be doing, and having to deal with the damage that they may have done to people's trust or their feelings or what have you. But there's still an opportunity even in that to move over to the light side of the force, right? Like to move over to being a more innately authentic, honest person. Like you say, honesty doesn't have to be said in a hurtful way, in a harmful way. It's like that excuse, I was just being honest. Like,
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
is that really the case? Because, can you express the same thing without being hurtful? I think you can, usually, in most cases. Not saying that the truth doesn't sometimes hurt. Of course it does. It can be painful if people are not willing to accept it, or if it's challenging them to expand from their current model of the world. It can be painful sometimes, but the intent is to be loving and kind if you say it that way, if you intend to be considerate, if you intend to be gentle, but still tell the truth. I think you can accomplish a lot, because then you don't create unnecessary waves, and those waves don't reverberate back onto you through other behaviors or through broken rapport or through opportunities that have now closed off that you don't have because you did that, and all sorts of repercussions. And the Buddha was wise. And that's the thing that I think of when I think of the Buddha. I think I said enlightened. What I really meant to say was awakened. That's what Buddha means, the awakened one. He was awake. He was the first woke person, maybe not the first. He was an early woke person. He was awakened to himself and his relationship to everything that is. He was awake to the nature of reality, the nature of his mind, his consciousness. And of course, every interaction that he had, he would be awakened to those little connections between him and that lady who accused him and the Brahmins who were jealous and put her up to it, him and the crowd that was around watching the whole thing, him and his students, his lineage of students, him and the prince, all of it. And he made the choice that was the most deeply considerate choice. And that's what I love about the quote unquote Dharma stories, which are the stories of the Buddha's life, is that when you get down to the nitty gritty of the original stories, they're devoid of any kind of supernatural mysticism or anything like that. They're just really sensible, insightful stories of wisdom. And that's what really touches my heart about it, is it feels very authentic. It doesn't need to be spiced up with a bunch of falseness around it. Like, oh, there were 10,000 Buddhas in the sky, and, all this kind of magical stuff, which, I have no problem with magical stuff, but not necessary. It's not authentic. The truth of what the Buddha was teaching is gold, and it's heavy and it's deep and it's just so raw and authentic and amazing by itself without all the extra frosting on it. You know what I mean? The cake is just perfect the way it is.
Fantastic. I'll have to apologize to our audience because you've used a trigger word there, and that's the word woke. Some people lose their tiny little minds when they hear the word woke. So just want to make sure we apologize to our listeners for perhaps, using a word that has many different connotations. And when you watch social media, you just watch people just going absolutely nuts about this term, woke. But being awake, being aware, being alert, being, in tune with yourself, I think is really important. So, if we put that in the context that you're sort of referencing here, it's that awareness of self, awareness of others, and being alive in the moment and aware of the system and the relational system that you're interacting with.
Right.
It's interesting. I was thinking about how far away as a society we've kind of gotten from that because, I'll come back to the whole social media thing because what I find is there's, everyone talks about the algorithm, like the algorithm as if it's this singular thing. And there's this thing that happens in the background that feeds people content and, when I'm watching things on social media, I think to myself at times, we are connected in a way that has never happened on the planet. Here's an example. This podcast, the fact that it exists is because you and I met on social media through our mutual friend, James Tripp, in a group that I created with James Tripp, to get people who were potential thought leaders together and to think about how we might, express our truths in an authentic way and to put that out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though you and I have not physically met, we have a sense of each other because of that connection. And yet I take a look at how social media has perhaps promoted this idea that people need to present this image, and there's actually a term for it. It's called image crafting.
Yeah.
Where people craft this image of themselves and they put it on social media. And if you know enough about what's going on behind the scenes, and in some instances, there are people who I know personally, or there are people who I know because they've been clients or whatever. And I know that what's happening on social media and what's happening behind the scenes are vastly different. And it's one of those things that for me, I like to challenge people around, like, what are you putting out there? Like, why are you putting it out there? And what are you trying to present? And does it all have to be perfect? And does it all make it like, do you have to make it look like everything's an amazing magical moment? And I think that with the way in which the algorithms, I'll pluralize it rather than the algorithm as if it's this thing, like there's an architect controlling the matrix. These algorithms have kind of created an environment on social media where we see the best and we also see the worst of humanity, but also it feeds an unreality into people's lives, and it then means that people might be afraid of putting the real stuff out there. Like, life is messy. People have moments of vulnerability. There's that faux vulnerability and that faux authenticity where people are faking it, and you can kind of see it a million miles away. And then there are people who are genuinely out there demonstrating stuff that you go, wow, that's a really raw moment, or that's a really raw expression of emotion, and I'm getting a sense of what this person might be like. But it's so interesting watching just how disconnected human beings are when they're in person. That it's a weird experience seeing people being seemingly more authentic online than they are in person, and they kind of save it for when they've got an audience. So yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive in that regard. When I was in house as a facilitator at a financial services institution, I had a moment of awareness. One of many moments of awareness, but I had a particular moment of awareness as a facilitator. And the reason why I raise this is because I've just literally come off the back of being a mentor trainer on James Tsakalos's exceptionally long, highly robust, very deep training on becoming a trainer and facilitator. So, geared towards NLP training and also broadly just facilitation and coaching. And I must admit, outstanding program. Did such an incredible job. And, we sort of saw at the beginning of the training, what people wanted from the program and the way they expressed that. And then at the end, completely different, like the rawness, the authenticity, just like the connection. I was blown away when they had to stand up as their final sort of presentations and talk about like what this meant for them and why they connected to the work. But where I was going with this is, as a mentor facilitator, I had to be raw and vulnerable with my group when I was helping them, just sharing stories about where things didn't go well, perhaps where I wasn't at my best, where I'd made mistakes, where I'd got it completely wrong, perhaps misread, a participant's responses, being called out by participants, and as a facilitator in this financial services environment, one of the moments I had was I'm in an environment with my colleagues, and if I'm presenting myself as someone else when I'm in front of them, then who am I when I'm literally off the stage, so to speak, when I'm outside of the room? So for me, I wanted to make sure that alignment was there, not only when I'm in front of a group, but also when I'm, like literally off the clock, so to speak, and I'm not presenting, that the experience of me across the context is consistent. And I'd like to think that that's the same also from a therapy standpoint as well, from like when you meet me, even right now, like as we're talking, that the me that I'm being is the me that you get regardless of where you meet me. And for me, that was an important moment in time to just once again, I'll come back to that self-authoring piece, like how am I self-authoring and how am I being authentic? And that was a really important moment for me. And I recognized that as a leader in the room, facilitating people, who are they getting and why should they follow me? And am I willing to be vulnerable, or am I presenting this image? And so I recognize that image crafting doesn't just happen online; it happens face to face as well. So just some stuff that came up for me as I was listening to that story and just sort of thinking about the different ways in which people present themselves. So, what's some of the stuff that you feel is really important to think about or share around that sort of vulnerability piece?
Yeah. Before I go completely over to that, I wanted to say something that came up as you were describing the congruence portion. I feel like it's a natural question for many of us to ask, well, then, is there such a thing as switching hats and having different aspects of you come out in different situations? And I would say, from my experience, the answer is yes. But you're still the person wearing the hat. So there are elements of you that have to remain the same. Otherwise, you're a pretty incongruent person. But like, I'm trying to think of an example here. Let's say you're a LARPer, okay, a live action role playing person.
I love that term,
Right?
LARPing.
To be a LARPer, right? That might be something that you geek out on, and you just go nuts with it, right? With like makeup and like outfits, and you will practice adopting a different, tone of voice, or a different, kind of linguistical style, or maybe different accents. And you might even behave very differently for those things, because that's just the character that you're stepping into, and that might be totally different than your the way you need to act in your finance accounting job that you work for this very conservative organization. Does that make you insincere, inauthentic? In my opinion, the answer is no. But a person could observe you, and it's theoretically possible that they would think of you as a very insincere person. You're not sincere. You shocked me. I can't believe you would talk like that and use that kind of language. It's so gross. Like, how would you, and because they they have a limited view of who you are.
Mm.
Also, sometimes people will date someone and then they finally meet someone that's from their past, like a long-term friend that knows them, you know, just after diapers practically, like really knows them. And it might bring out a certain side in them that they'd never seen. And it might scare them a little, or it might throw them off, or it might just be entertaining. But the question could come up, wow, do I really know this person? And do I need to be concerned about what might emerge from that experience and this person? I just think that's a natural question to ask. And what is the difference between uh, having a very diverse capacity, like an ability to switch hats, an ability to change gears, an ability to, we'll say, you know, be naughty with your lover, right? You're not going to behave that way or speak that way towards someone, hopefully, in a business environment or in a public speaking environment or
Mm.
anything else. It's you have a right to have a certain level of privacy. So
Mm.
I learned about these categories. I don't remember where exactly. I think I was listening to a lecture at one point, and it was this: you have the public persona, you've
Yep.
got the private persona, and then you have your secret persona. And
Mm.
everyone has all three. It doesn't matter who you are. Even people
Mm.
who pretend and claim very strongly that they don't have that, they do. It's just a question of how big are those circles.
Yep.
So you might have what you would project on your LinkedIn or what we would have on a business card or a website, and that's your public persona.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your private, which is going to be people like your family and close friends. And then there might be a secret self, a secret persona that maybe only one person knows or maybe nobody knows. And that is where the danger zone comes in, right? If you're a psychopath, something like that, that's where dangerous behaviors can be hidden, like
Mm.
the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world or whatever, that have this really large secret life.
Yeah.
And, in the case of an undercover operative, whether they're working for the FBI or the ASD or the CIA or something like that, they might have that as a part of their existence because it's what they do for a living. They have to have a very secret, large secret life, and it's for perhaps altruistic reasons,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps anti-terrorism or something like that, right? So there are some subtleties to navigate when you're trying to understand what congruence really means.
Mm.
And I'm not sure if I have all of the words to describe it, but I just noticed that there can be some misinterpretations, misunderstandings that could come up for someone if they didn't know that you were a very diverse person. Like people have been shocked by me who didn't know I was kind of a Renaissance man. I'm into a lot of things, and they're wildly different. But if you know me well enough, you can see the pattern inside of all of it that connects me together. And that's why I would say I'm a fairly congruent person.
Mm. Mm.
I notice there's something incongruent. It's an eyesore for me, and I will look deeper at it and try to do something about it when I see it.
Mm.
So that, I think, is the difference. Is sometimes people who maybe suffer personality disorders, things like that, they might just ignore that. They might bury it. They might get really enraged or angry if you point it out to them. They won't
Mm.
respond with reflectiveness or consideration. They'll respond with extreme defensiveness. So yeah, I mean, if I go into a public presentation, I'm going to dress up for that. I might
Mhm.
not wear, you know, my t-shirt with a coffee stain on the thing. I might actually, do my hair. I might actually take a shower and actually look a little shave and things like that. Is that insincere? No, that's
Mm.
my consideration for what I do to get ready to present myself. And it's just part of who I am, but I'm still presenting to that crowd a version of me that I feel is most sincere. Like I'm going to maybe admit that I have faults or maybe talk about things that I can, that make me somewhat relatable to the crowd that I'm speaking to. And
Mm.
that's an attempt to still keep my finger on the pulse of what I think authenticity really means for me. while doing this different behavior. If I'm teaching a group of children, I'm not going to speak to them the way I might speak to other groups. It's going to be different because I want
Yeah.
to make sure that I'm appropriate. And so I just wanted to say that before I got into
Yeah.
the other vulnerability part. And
Yeah.
that's me
And I think,
with you, and with our listeners. I wanted to share that. Yeah.
and I'm glad that you've offered that nuanced view. I think, we're, for me, I'm drawing some distinctions between, like what are the behaviors that I'm demonstrating, particularly like, for instance, in the professional environment that are congruent and aligned with my core values, and are those core values consistent across multiple contexts, as opposed to perhaps values that are relative. They become, criteria that becomes more operant in different environments. So, the core values will be the core values because they're core. They're fundamental to my being, my view of the world, and the way I'm self-authoring. And then there'll be other values that are perhaps relative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, in the corporate space, for instance, there's going to be a difference in the way that I behave in the corporate space relative to the way that I behave with my friends and family, and, obviously with my wife in a private setting. But I've got like a core set of values that seem to cross over all of those contexts because they're core and fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are others that are perhaps more relative depending on my outcomes. But when you were raising it and you were sort of talking about that kind of stuff, what came up for me was a couple of frameworks that popped into my mind. One is the Johari window. So often with groups, we take them through this process of, and particularly when we're thinking about leadership once again, and like when you're a leader, what do people know about you, and how well do they know you, and things like that. But also when you're thinking about your team, for instance, like how well does the team know each other? And so the Johari window was actually a framework that was put forward by two psychologists, Joe and Harry. So Johari window. And
I was
and it's really about this
Indian name, Johari.
Yes, it sounds that way, but it's not. It's just the synthesis of the two names.
Got it.
My light just went out. So I'm in darkness now. The dark side is coming through. So for those of you who are watching the video, you just would have seen me lose my light in front of me. So the Johari window is around this sort of like this public space, like what's known to me, what's known to you about us, like known to self, known to others, known by self about us and others. But then there's also a section there where there's stuff that I know about me that you don't know about me. And unless I disclose that, then you're not going to know about that. It's like known to me, not known to others, and vice versa. Like if I'm talking to you, there's stuff that you know about you that I don't know about you. And unless I actually ask information, I inquire, I'm not going to find that out unless you solicit, unless you actually volunteer that. I'm not going to know. So known to you, but not known to others, known to me, not known to others. And then there's known to everyone. So like the public space. And then there's also not known to self, not known to others. It's kind of like the unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And from that perspective, that sort of popped into my mind, like when we're in an environment where we're with others, how big is that public space? And the more we self-disclose, or the more we inquire and solicit information or solicit feedback on ourselves, the stuff that's known to others but not known to us about us is in essence our blind spot. We don't recognize that there's stuff that people see about us that we don't see about ourselves because it's on display for others but not known to us. So it's quite an interesting little framework worthwhile looking into the Johari window, and a great way of thinking about, like how much of me am I actually bringing to any interaction? There may be a lot of stuff that I know about me, but there's not a lot of stuff that I'm disclosing about me. And like once again, to what degree, expressing yourself in the right way at the right time, to the right degree, to the right people is a useful way of thinking about it. Not just like being authentic is just breaking down in tears and then going, I'm being super vulnerable and I'm being authentic about my experience. That's not really good emotional self-regulation. But, with people that are the right people and at the right time, expressing that stuff is really useful. But also, what came up for me was the whole trust piece. And there's another framework that I really love, and I facilitate that with groups and leaders and so forth. And that's around the trust formula it's from the Trusted Advisor. It's a great little formula, and it's actually a trustworthiness formula. And the trustworthiness formula is there's a numerator and a denominator. On the numerator, you've got credibility, reliability, and intimacy. On the denominator, you've got self-interest. And so when you were talking about LinkedIn, I was thinking there's an example of an environment where people are building their credibility.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know about their reliability, and we really don't know about them because often on LinkedIn and things like that, you're getting a lot of image crafting, people putting themselves out there as a subject matter expert, or, look at all the things I'm doing, look at all the great stuff that's going on in my life, and look at this training that I've delivered, and look at this program I've been involved with, and look at this accolade that I've gotten. So the kind of credibility, sorry.
Yeah, it's a highly curated message. Yeah.
It is. And that's the image crafting in action. The reliability piece is about like your experience with people. Have they delivered what they said they're going to deliver? Is there a track record with them? Like when I track back through my experience, have they made good on their promises? And once again, that's that, do I do what I say I'm going to do? Yeah. And then on the top line, there's intimacy, and the intimacy is that felt sense of others. Like, do I know you? Are you a known person to me? And a lot of people focus on the credibility and the reliability piece, and that's very much the sort of like the logic. But the intimacy piece on that top line is that felt sense, and it's heart based. It's like, do I have a felt sense of who you are? And so if you focus on that top line and you only focus on the credibility and the reliability, but you don't build intimacy, that felt sense of connection, that I know you, I know who you are, I've had enough context, enough experiences across multiple contexts with you, then you can do the credibility and the reliability really well. I still won't necessarily extend trust to you because I don't know who you are. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it all comes undone, or it's greatly diminished at the very least, if the self-interest piece is really high. So if you are motivated by self-interest and you're interested in your outcomes, but at the expense of other people's outcomes, that high self-interest actually diminishes the top line. Mm-hmm. So, just some stuff that came up. I was thinking, okay, if you've got low self-interest and you're genuinely expressing yourself in a way that is appropriate for the context that you're in, and people get a felt sense of who you are, you can be vulnerable and authentic. There's a caveat here. You don't want to express yourself in a way that undermines your credibility.
Yeah.
Especially since credibility is the ticket to play, because people want to know they're in safe hands, but they also want to know they're in good hands. Mm-hmm. And so the credibility piece is really important. So if you're expressing your vulnerability in a way that undermines your credibility, then you're perhaps doing yourself a disservice in the grand scheme of things. So we want to have that delicate balance of, yes, safe hands, good hands, known person. I feel safe with this person. That's where trust is extended. But if you think of the intimacy piece and the self-interest piece, we may not necessarily know what's driving somebody's motivations, but if that's that felt sense that you're only doing what you need to do in order to manipulate me, I'm not going to extend trust to you. You're not going to be a trustworthy person. Therefore, I'm not going to be vulnerable with you. I'm not going to reveal more of myself or my outcomes or my hopes, aspirations, and dreams. So, it gets interesting when we start to look at these other frameworks and how that impacts authenticity, and how authenticity potentially affects feelings of safety, and also how people won't want to feel vulnerable with someone who seems to be out there to manipulate them behind the scenes for self-interest. So I thought that might be useful as a bit of a...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a little bit like music where certain notes being played together just work well. They're not exactly the same note, but they work well together to create certain things. Just like these things you're bringing up, they go along with authenticity, just like vulnerability comes along with that. And I would say to some degree, image crafting belongs in people's repertoire if they're doing business and relating in public. You have to have some image crafting to a certain degree, but those things that you mentioned have to temper the image crafting enough so that it comes across as a service to you. It comes across as the credibility, the authenticity, the genuineness. All of that stuff has to come across in the way that the end result is that they don't feel that they're just looking at a crafted message. They're looking at something that intrigues them, that makes them want to step further into relation, whether it's like trusting, business, whatever it is. And the idea of service to others comes along. And when you can think about not just how can I give you something so that you'll get me something, but literally how can I be of service to you? How can I help? If you strongly believe that helping people just naturally does result in reciprocation at some point, if you have a faith in that, if you have an understanding that that's mostly how it works in the world, there'll be times when you give things and you don't get back. And if you're okay with that and you can be generous, there will be reciprocation. And if you're comfortable getting a certain percentage of reciprocation and you like giving because it feels good to give, you like to see people shine, then I think that your own position just naturally does raise. There's that saying, we raise ourselves by lifting others up. And I love that. It some truth to that, but you can't think of it as like quid pro quo, tit for tat or something like I'm going to do this thing and I have to get this thing from it immediately. That's not really a holistic way of looking at it. I mean, you're doing it for an altruistic reason and you want to survive and you want to thrive, right? Then part of that might be, well, I want to feel energized by giving. I want to feel the good nature of what that feels like to do that. And I believe that good things come to me when I do that. I think that's perfectly fine. There's nothing false or manipulative about that. It's just like, no, I think if I find things that I can give to the world or to a group or a community, and I consistently do that, the net result is that I'll probably be doing okay. People will know about there will be people who see it and appreciate it. There may be relationships that are built on it. Like, wow, I'm really grateful that you do this. It's so thoughtful of you to do that. Thank you so much. And you get a chance to open doors. And I don't think that's a false way of going about it. It's like, it's about the quality of how you enter into that. It obviously could be done in a really slimy way if you wanted, but the results would be different. It wouldn't be generated from that beautiful generative space inside of you. True generosity, right? And that brings me to the idea of vulnerability, because another mutual friend of James Tripp, his name's John Morgan. He said one time, he said, vulnerability is invulnerability. And I thought about what he was saying. At first I was like, what? Vulnerability?
Oh, yeah.
From invulnerability, invulnerability from vulnerability? How's that make sense? And I thought about my own experience of being capable of sharing my genuine feelings, like sharing with people how I really feel, even in situations where maybe the person was being a little aggressive. And how many times at the end of the day, at the end of those transactions, I ended up in a better position because of it. And it was most of the time and then over the course of time, being vulnerable paid off, not just because it helped the relationships that I was in and things like that, but because I felt less destroyed by my vulnerability. In other words, the fear of being vulnerable is that someone's going to get you, right? They're going to stab you in the heart. But if you lean into the idea that you can be vulnerable and then you do get an occasional stab in your heart, what happens after you recover from that stab in the heart is you realize, well, that didn't kill me. That didn't destroy me. So maybe I'm tougher and stronger than I think I am. And maybe what's going on is I'm getting not a thicker skin, but I'm becoming more resilient. And maybe I'm realizing that I'm not this brittle thing that needs to worry about someone knowing things about me because they could use it against me. They could hurt me. Maybe I don't need to worry about that so much. Maybe it's okay for me to step into a bigger version of me, a bigger self-concept that says, I can be that person. I can live a little bit more with my heart on my sleeves and not worry about it. If I commit to the practice, if I say to myself, vulnerability is invulnerability, that each time I step into that truth, that authentic, vulnerable space, I'm creating opportunities for myself to see how truly big my consciousness really is. And there's a lesson in that if you don't lean into it, you never discover. If you continue to think that you got to keep everything clamped down, locked down, walls up, then you'll always be the same size inside. You don't change. But if you take calculated risks, right? Use that xiphoid process in your brain and calculated risks where you expose yourself to the potential of being harmed in intelligent ways. I'm not suggesting that you go to a known toxic narcissist and tell them all your secrets. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who have earned your trust, people who demonstrate kindness and sincerity and take a freaking risk. Let yourself be seen a little bit and learn from it. Learn from the whole cycle of what happens when they see who you are. Maybe they do attack you, but it's done because they're trying to work it out with you. They're not trying to hurt you, right? And you do have to adjust your mental, emotional, space to handle the criticism or the difficulty. But then you can emerge on the other end of that, realizing that you just got closer to that person. You worked it through with them through talking it out and having time to process it. And now you trust each other more because you showed each other who you really were. You didn't hide. You didn't play a small game. You played a slightly bigger game than you were used to playing. And I think there's value in that idea that stop feeding the idea that you are this small, vulnerable, like you're a small, brittle, person who can't handle if people hurt you. You absolutely can handle it. You're stronger than that. And you'll never know if you don't sort of test it. You've got to put yourself out there a little bit in intelligent ways. Again, not with someone who's demonstrating extremely toxic behavior, but in healthy relationships when things get a little testy or whatever, that's the time to really stretch yourself a little bit. And maybe if you're not sure about the world, then test it a little bit. Just go a little bit beyond what you think is okay. Go a little bit further than that and just see. Just see. Maybe you realize, oh, I can handle that. That's not that bad. And you find out that you can kind of live a little bit more like that. And it's easier to live in that authentic space because you chose to trust yourself and you've earned credit each time you've done that. You've built trust. Those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Vulnerability just means ability to be wounded, right? That's all it means. And, if you're doing anything that opens you up, guess what? You're open to being wounded. You open your arm, hug, you're exposing your vital organs, but think of the benefit of what a beautiful hug can be in your life. You have to open your mouth to eat. I mean, there's just part of nature that we have to expose ourselves to some degree in order to get access to things that we don't have. So you have to open, the Tao Te Ching says, you have to open your hands in order to hold something, right? Like that's a concept of realizing that it's just part of life, that we have to realize that we expose ourselves to the elements in order to build our resilience to them.
Yeah, I love the metaphors that come through, and your little sayings as you link back into ancient wisdom traditions and things like that. I had to switch the light on because this is the Enlightenment Podcast. Here I am sitting in the dark, and I found that a bit of irony there. You were all lit up, and I was all dark, and I was thinking, all right, we've gone and explored the shadow self for a little bit, and I thought it's time to switch the light on. So my apologies for sort of moving back and forth between that. I've got the crown chakra thing going on. If you're watching the video, you'll see the light shines off the top of my head. Actually, this is about vulnerability in that sense, that when I was losing my hair, it was like, you get the strategic comb over and things like that. You see people who are trying to hide it. This is what acceptance looks like. So, being willing to be vulnerable by having a, like a bald head. And so that's, the journey that I went on with my hair loss, and, but also, coming to acceptance, like, whatever, like it's not me, like I'm not my hair any more than I am any other part of my body. I mean, like who am I? There's some important stuff there, but I digress. Talking about stages of changes of life, I found that as I've gotten older, I've become more willing to be vulnerable and more willing to be more emotionally expressive. And it was interesting. I'll come back to some of the conversations I had on the trainers training, because you know some things happen on the training, not just with the participants, but also with the facilitator. And if we look at facilitation and a facilitator as a leader of the group and the state of the group and establishing norms and maintaining the norms and the implicit and explicit rules. I remember when I was on my practitioner training and I watched James Casados well up at one point in time, and he welled up at a particular point in time. I was like, what the hell's going on with this guy? Like, he can't manage his state. Like, what the hell? And I that was at a point in time where I was like, no, you have to be like strong. You have to present really, confidently. You don't look like you're having an emotional moment in front of the room.
Yeah.
And thankfully I had enough time back of room as an apprentice to unpack some of James's strategies for that. But when he was doing that, he was in a state where that expression was an appropriate expression given what was being taught. And it also acts as an emotional marker for others that whatever's happening here is not that, like there's this important distinction there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that I must have modeled from James. And it's happened in various trainings that I've run where when I'm in the moment deeply connected to something and I'm being moved in a way that emotion comes forward, I've obviously got a choice. I can either choose to express it or not, but I do it. I let it come through, and I've welled up. I've had tears streaming down my face when I've been emotionally moved or impacted, and I think it's something that I've grown more comfortable with, and it's something that I think really does impact people when they see someone who isn't just crying for the sake of crying, and it's not a big show. It's like they're genuinely moved. It's a genuine, authentic expression of emotion that is appropriate and is congruent for what's happening right then and there. And I think that this is the piece that I think is missing for some people, is that we are so worried about being seen at times that we present an image. And that's that image crafting piece. And yet what we all deeply crave is that authenticity and that connection with people. And there's all these sorts of wonderful techniques and things like that you can learn to hotwire connection. But one of the things that does definitely improve connectivity is vulnerability. And when someone demonstrates vulnerability in front of others, they've de-escalated the threat response in themselves, and now they're being real. And so some people value honesty and realness, and they want that from people, but they're not willing to create safety. And some people need safety before they can be real. And so I don't know whether you've ever had people who are just like brutally honest, and they're brutally honest all the time because, that's just their way, and they'll tell you what's on their mind and they'll give you a piece of their mind. And then they want people to be real with them in return, but they haven't created enough safety for people to then reveal that vulnerability and then express themselves authentically. So I find that that's an important piece here, is if you want people to be authentic and vulnerable with you, you need to lead with that authenticity and that vulnerability so that you set the tone. So there's another form of leadership inside of this. You don't have to be a formalized leader. You don't have to be someone in a position of power, authority, or control. And it can be just in your personal relationships. When you are leading with that vulnerability and that authenticity, and it's genuine, it's congruent, it's appropriate, then it has a very profound impact on the quality of the relationship that you're having with other people, but most importantly with yourself. So, it was an interesting conversation across that training, because it's not just training to present and not just training content and facilitating process. It's also who and how are you being with people, and how much of yourself are you willing to give to the group. And so they were a bit surprised because they look at me and I don't come across as light and fluffy and, peace, love, and mung beans. I'm definitely not that kind of character. But when I've highlighted that I've had moments in time and in corporate environments as well, not just simply public programs, with my own direct participants, but also inside of organizations in which, like corporate training is pretty, it's a professional environment, where I've had moments where I've been deeply moved by what I'm seeing and hearing with my participants, that I've had tears well up. it already, like they go, oh, really? You of all people? Yes. And I've become more comfortable with it. And I think that's a bit of a journey
Yeah.
that I think I've been on in regards to moving from presenting as invulnerable and thinking that that's a good thing to recognizing that there's strength in vulnerability. And I did some training with um, a facilitator in Australia in Brené Brown's Dare to Lead program. And she talks a lot about vulnerability and authenticity and shame and stuff like that. But it was really interesting around, like not armoring up, so just
Yeah.
when something comes up, that people have a tendency to armor up. And she says that's when you have to recognize that that's when you want to not armor up and you just stay human. And I think stay human's a good thing. And I don't think we're seeing enough of that from people. And it's unfortunate.
I totally agree. There's a saying that is a pretty common saying for people who do like personal growth stuff, and it's share your scars, not your wounds. When it comes
Yeah.
to public teaching, I'm not talking about with a private person like a therapist or something, but when you're teaching something, you should. It's okay to share your scars, the things that you've overcome, and it can be a moment of vulnerability, but it has to be a point where it's reached a completion point within you, and you're now sharing something that has a solution to it. You're not presenting them with a problem, because that's not really the job of someone who's teaching. However, when it comes to, let's say, leading with vulnerability, it's okay to say, for example, admit, hey, I don't exactly know how to solve this. So I'm going to be talking to you about these 3 problems, and I'd like to brainstorm with you guys. And I want to get your best, ideas, and we're going to figure out a way through this. So you're basically admitting that maybe I don't necessarily know how to get through this, but this is a problem that we're all going to solve. It's not about you solving your problem. It's about a we issue. Like, this company is, experiencing this issue right now. And I have some ideas about this, but I really need to hear from the brightest and the best of you. I really need to let you know that this is something that's troubling me, and it's probably troubling some of you. And so there's a certain kind of solution oriented kind of discussion that's happening. It's not saying, oh my God, I don't know what to do. We're stuck. Our whole situation has just gone to crap. And you're not just throwing a problem at them and saying, I'm powerless to do anything about it. You're saying, I'm powerful enough to admit to you that I haven't quite solved this yet, but I think we're going to do it by doing these things. Let's get started. And it's leading towards something that has a solution. And I think that's a different kind of a way to use that. And I think that could be valuable in corporate settings too.
Absolutely. And that's the nature of, like we're experiencing wicked problems, and they're not simple problems. They're, highly complex with lots of moving parts, and we're seeing stuff on the planet that we've never seen before. So, nobody's expecting to have a pre-existing, prefabricated answer to problems that we've never seen before. So, that ambiguity, that disruption, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So VUCA is a framework that often is bandied around.
VUCA.
Yeah. So there's also, there's a whole bunch of stuff inside of that will lead people to feel quite vulnerable and uncertain about the future. And as a leader, if you're in a appointed position as leader, or even if you're just leading a team through problem solving process, it's okay not to know the answer when there is, no previous or pre-existing sort of situational context that we've been in that's been similar or the same. So I think that, authenticity and vulnerability is an important piece moving forward for everyone, in particular leaders as well, because they're not meant to know all the answers. They're meant to, adapt to what's going on, and then also pull from the collective wisdom of their team. And so sometimes we just don't know what it'll look like. And for some people, you don't have to try and fluff your way through and be as if you know what it's going to be like and how the the outcome is going to play out, especially when we don't know. Just admitting that you don't know, but let's just start to test, find out, iterate. You're leaning into being vulnerable, but also you're being authentic. If you don't know, you don't know. So there was a great story that that I remember hearing in the very early stages of my facilitation career. It was a story put forward by Jay Conger. And he had a video, or it was at least a presentation on, it was called The Spotlight of Leadership. And he would talk about how, for instance, leaders sometimes forget themselves, in various moments, like when they're in front of their team or in front of their people, or, and when we're talking about leadership, we're not just simply talking about people in corporate roles. It's like anytime you are leading, that could be, hobby, groups that you're involved with. It could be in your family. It could be, like in your social group. Like, just think about, like, leadership comes in lots of different forms. But he highlights that the spotlight of leadership is always on you if you're in a position of leadership, especially if you carry a title, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he frames up this great story about, like, when people are young and they get their first experience of a scientific tool. He says, like, you get this little device and it's quite concave, and like you look through it, and when you shine the light through it, it kind of magnifies the world. And he says, like, people often have an experience of a magnifying glass. Now, Carlos, I'm going to ask you the question he asked his group. Like, when you were younger, did you ever get a magnifying glass?
Absolutely.
What was the very first thing you did with a magnifying glass?
Let's see. I think I just looked around at things like my hand and my clothing and, like, anything that I could look at. I just started viewing and kind of opening up, and looking at things through it, That's
not the common response that people give. Often they go, I went out there and I burnt ants.
Oh, I think I eventually probably did that. I was burning leaves and things like that, and eventually a poor ant. Yeah.
Or they went out and burnt leaves, but they took this wonderful device that had the capacity to magnify their world. And, like, you went around and you were curious and you're looking around at things, but some people turn this thing into a device that was the equivalent of the death ray, right? They start burning these little innocent critters that are just doing their thing. And,
sure.
And he says, that's what's happening with your people, or the people who are following you, is the magnifying glass is always on you. The spotlight of leadership is always going through that magnifying glass, and it's either going to enhance all those positive qualities, or it's going to burn holes in your reputation and your credibility.
Yeah.
And what he was highlighting was the spotlight of leadership's always on you. So even in those moments where you don't think you're being a leader, people are paying attention to you, particularly in those informal moments. It's even brighter because you've forgotten that you're a leader. You're just like one of the group, so to speak. Now, this is where it gets interesting in regards to that congruity and that authenticity across the different contexts. Like, if you are genuinely connected to your values and you're expressing those values in a congruent way, and your reputation and your character are aligned, then, that spotlight of leadership, whatever that is, the magnifying glass that people have, it's going to be consistent across the different contexts. But some people forget themselves. And that's the way I like to sort of wrap up our conversation today. Is like, it's great to be vulnerable. It's important to be authentic and aligned and congruent. It gets easier to be vulnerable when it's part of your value set. And when you do that and it's aligned with your values, then it's easy to be congruent and authentic. So it kind of feeds in on itself, doesn't it? It's like, you have to have the value. Are you willing to value authenticity, and you are willing to value vulnerability? Do you have good emotional intelligence in regards to how you express that in the context that you're in, to the right people, the right time, to the right degree, and in the right way, so that you don't come across as an asshole? And at the same time, being aware that those moments where you don't think people are observing you is probably when you're demonstrating whether you're being authentic and congruent. And so, just some stuff from my end. What about yourself? What about some last words?
What you said about VUCA, I mean, a lot of people think of that as something to avoid, but if you leverage that to your advantage, then, which is, I think, the wisest approach, because you're always going to be dealing with VUCA no matter what. If you're being kind of awake and active in the world, it's going to happen, right? If you take it as, well, VUCA is going to be a stimulus for me to improve, stimulus for me to keep momentum going in the direction I want it to go. At that point, you're leveraging VUCA for your benefit. And I think that's really important, especially for people who are coming into this from a professional space and looking at teams and leadership and groups and interactions, I think you really have to think about that, whether you're doing a tech industry thing or a service industry thing or whatever it is. We have to have the attitude of leaning in, just like we were talking about vulnerability and authenticity and all those things. We have to lean in. We have to say, it's okay to be uncomfortable. And discomfort is not necessarily the trigger of, we shouldn't be doing that. It sometimes can be the trigger of, that means we need to grow. We need to develop some skills. We need support. We need a plan. We need a strategy. We need to constantly transform and keep awakening our ability to overcome the obstacles. Because if you see the obstacles as an opportunity and you can start to think, well, what is this telling me about me? And what is it telling me about my approach? And what kind of resources do I have to overcome this? Well, you're going to be transformed by that. And, kind of linking back to some of the very first things we said about authenticity, I will say that Marcus Aurelius, who also said the obstacle is the way, I believe it was him, one of the Stoics anyway, said that discipline derives from purpose. When you're diving into your authenticity, truly diving into this and the vulnerability and all that, you're not going to be able to avoid discovering your purpose. And I'm not necessarily always talking about the larger purpose, like the grandiose, abstract thing that is why you're here. I mean, more in the personal sense of, what is my purpose right now as I sit down to meditate, or as I am writing this dissertation, or as I am preparing for this class that I'm teaching? What is my purpose? Stepping into the uncertainty and into the unknown and being comfortable and really identifying what you're actually feeling in that moment without hiding from it and embracing it, leaning into it, will allow your purpose to become vivid against the background. At that point, you know exactly what you need to do. Therefore, your discipline is not it's not a mystery. It's inherent. It's emergent. You know exactly what you need to do. That's your discipline. It's not an effort, because without it, you won't reach that goal that you have. You will not attain that purpose. So all of these things are self-reflective. All of these things seem to kind of be self-supporting. And when you do one, you work on the other two. They kind of come hand in hand, just like those notes that work together in a chord, or those colors that work together in a scheme. They just work together. And that's all I have to say for now.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's the reason why I love partnering with you on this, because you've now quoted Buddha, Tao Te Ching, I think maybe even Lao Tzu in there somewhere, and now Marcus Aurelius. You're the deep one. I'm the shallow one on this one.
But you're the one with the brilliant opening up the universe.
I'm definitely the shallow host on this show, and you're our philosopher. So thank you so much for sharing. One last bit, and that is, what have you got coming up that you might want our audience to perhaps connect with you on? You've got a workshop or anything like that coming up that you'd like to spruik?
Yeah. It's not scheduled yet, but I'm actually having a conversation in just a couple of days with someone who wants to set up a sacred medicine retreat with me in Colorado. So apparently this therapist has a group of people, and we're going to have a conversation in just a couple of days on Zoom and talk about those details. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to those personal growth retreats. I love them. They're an amazing experience for everyone, including me. And in the sort of background, I have not picked the dates yet, but I'm going to go for my round 2 of the memory reconsolidation course, which is now going to be an 8-week course as opposed to a 6-week course, because I have a little bit more that I want to convey in that time. So those 2 things I'm looking forward to. And of course, one more. I'm getting married on August 30th.
Yeah, so not far away. So there'll be
and that's a big change, and not a big change. It's a big, beautiful step. We already live together and treat each other like we're married, but it's just a beautiful thing that we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll do a wedding episode. We won't do a honeymoon episode though, because Well, yeah, big things for you in the future. With me, the 5th of September in Melbourne, I'll be running a hypnosis training. So that starts on the 5th. It goes 5th, 6th, 7th for the first chunk. And then we follow up again with the second chunk about 5 days later. So I think from memory, it's the 12th, 13th, and 14th from memory. And so it's a 6-day training. It's in person. It's very practical, and it's very much focused on the hypnosis side of things, not so much the theory side of things. So it's about building practical skills. And I've also had someone recently contact me, and they really want me to come out to Adelaide. So if anybody's listening and they happen to be from Adelaide, there's the view to running a training in February next year or thereabouts in Adelaide on the same program. It'll be a 5-day straight program. Other than that, not really much else to report from my end in regards to public programs and stuff like that. Once again, if you're interested in the hypnosis training, that's the one that's coming up very, very soon. Best bet is to go to paulmischel.com/hypnosis-training. And you can sign up there, and there's still an early bird special that's still running. Other than that, not much else from me. Thanks so much for your time today, Carlos. It's always great connecting with you and hearing about what's been going on for you personally and also professionally.
Paul, it's an absolute pleasure every single time, and I look forward to our next meeting too.
Lovely. Thanks, Carlos. And for our audience, please, if you enjoy this podcast, please like, subscribe, and also share it with people that you feel would benefit from the content of our discussions. It's better than us just screaming into the void, talking at each other. So the more you share it, the more visibility we get, and that helps us to spread more light in the world, which is part of the reason why we call this the Enlightenment Program. So thank you for listening. Thanks, Carlos. And
Amen,
episode 3, done and dusted.